Good evening. I'd like to call to order the San Carlos City Council meeting for August 22nd, 2016. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, after a nice summer recess, it is good to be back. Are there any changes to the order of the agenda tonight?
None from staff, Mr. Mayor.
Anybody else on the dais? Nope. All right, we'll move on to item 4, council communications and announcements, and we'll start with Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Who are you guys again? No, actually, hope everybody had a great summer, and I actually have nothing to report tonight.
All right, thank you. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few things. I went to a couple of chamber mixers. I normally wouldn't report on that, but since Lingso just came to town, or actually more accurately back to town, it was nice to go over and see their new facility. They gave a great tour and got to meet the entire family, and they were very happy to be back in town. So we, again, wishing them a great second run in San Carlos. Also, I attended a few board meetings. We're all appointed to various boards and commissions, so attended a Peninsula Clean Energy meeting for Cameron in July, a high-speed rail meeting, and a Council of Cities dinner in Belmont, during which we got a report from Jim Hartnett, who is the new chairman or CEO of Samtrans, and he's just been on the job about a year now, I guess, and he's doing a wonderful job. Also attended the National Night Out a few weeks ago. I went over to the one near my house on Sunnydale, but it was sort of breaking up, but all the police and fire vehicles were headed over to Thornhill, so they invited me to go over there, which I did, and I got a chance to talk to a lot of residents, and it's always good to just talk to people and listen to their concerns and that sort of thing. And then finally, Bob Grisilli and myself attended the services of Howard Girdlestone on Saturday. Howard was, probably many people know Howard, lived to be 95 years old, probably owned half of Laurel Street, I think. Very well thought of, and also the founder of this group called the World Famous Tuesday Lunch Bunch that I was invited to join a few years ago. And we're going to miss Howard a lot. He was an institution in this town. And that's all I have.
All right, thanks, Ron. Matt?
So I did not attend any meetings. There was a airport roundtable meeting that took place during our break, and I chose not to go because we were on break. So I didn't want to ruin my vacation. There are a couple of things I wanted to mention. I did notice in my email box that I got the notice from Peninsula Clean Energy that was sent to council members letting us know that we would receive letters about the launching of Peninsula Clean Energy. And then as it turned out, my home was in one of the areas of San Carlos where people received the letters. And I do want to say, I actually went in and I talked to the city manager about the letter I received. I was not happy with it. The letter starts out, first sentence, I'll just read from it. Peninsula Clean Energy will soon be San Mateo County's official electricity provider. And I thought that's rather deceptive because it's saying we're going to be your provider. And unless you read all the way through the letter and read all the way to the bottom, one wouldn't know that, number one, because of state law, it doesn't state this in the letter that it's state law, but because of state law, everybody is switched over to Peninsula Clean Energy, whether they want to be in that program or not. They must then call and opt out if they want to stay with PG&E, if they've been happy with PG&E. To me, that is no way to run your business or to launch your business. I wouldn't do that in my business. When I was, when I started back in 1993, I didn't just take over people's accounts with other architects and say, now you're working with me unless you want to opt back out to the architect you have already. That to me is just unfair, and I don't think it was right of the state to make that law. And I wasn't here. I was in the hospital when we voted on that, whether to go forward ultimately with Peninsula Clean Energy and offer it to San Carlos customers. If I had been here for that very reason, that principle, I would have voted against it. Later in the letter, it does, at the very bottom, give people the directions on how to opt out, and I will tell you, I voted with my dollars, if you will, and I called and I opted out because I do not want to do business with any outfit that's going to start their business that way. And the other thing that it drove home to me is something that I was very leery about in the very beginning when I heard about Peninsula Clean Energy, and that is that I believe the angle the state is taking is to be, as it says in the beginning of this letter, the purveyor of electricity to all customers in California. I think that is the goal, and I don't want to see that happen. And so again, I voted with my own way by calling and opting out of the program. The other thing that I wanted to report on and I make people aware of that is disturbing to me as a council member is we now have a new sheriff in San Mateo County. Greg Monks, because of health issues, chose to resign, and that opened up the position. The way the meeting was noticed, where ultimately Don Horsley made the motion to appoint Carlos Bolanos, was not done properly. The way that, it was a dismay to Jackie Spear, to I think I'm speaking this correctly from what I've seen, and to our senators. And they actually had people at the meeting to speak to what was going on that morning, thinking that what the Board of Supervisors was going to talk about was the process, and the process being either to put it on the ballot, which would have cost the county nothing because of the November election, the presidential election, or to go through an appointment process, which if you go through an appointment process, you can still involve the public. But what was done at that meeting was just cutting the public out altogether, because a motion was made, and it didn't look like that was going to be the question of the morning, the action item, to make a motion to appoint somebody, but that is what was done. I may speak more to this at another time after I research it more, but from what I see, I am very disappointed, and I feel badly for Mr. Bolanos, because the sheriff, if you don't know, is the top elected official in the county. In other words, that office carries more power than we do, or the Board of Supervisors, or anybody who's in an elected office. And to have him put into office in that manner and to put a mark on his position, to me, is just a travesty. And I am so sad that it was done that way. But that is what was done, and I wanted to share my feelings about it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Bob?
Attended a couple of meetings. We had Silicon Valley Clean Water, which we have a monthly meeting on, proceeding again with different projects, one in particular of trying to basically work with Recology and with basically foodstuffs that the composting, and then turn them into energy. That's one of the things that we're trying to work on. San Francisco has a facility to be able to do that, and we're working with San Francisco's Recology and also our local Recology to try to, it's a pilot program now down here, and we're trying to see if we can generate a lot more energy and utilize the things that they're coming into the garbage, in the compost. We also appointed the Silicon or the SBWMA Rethink Waste, which is the representative of 11 cities and the county, which is the garbage group, appointed Joe LaMariana as our new executive director. So Joe has taken over as of August 1st, and we expect some good things coming out of that, a new set of eyes to look at things, a new way to perhaps approach different things as we come in a couple of years to decide whether we're going to keep ecology and renew the contract or do something else. It's a very important position, and I think it was a extremely vetted process. We had a number of applicants. We had 3 or 4 interviews of different folks. I think it's going to work out really well for us. And the last thing I wanted to mention is, as Mr. Collins said, I attended the memorial service for Howard Girdlestone. And to add on a little bit to what Ron said, I don't think I know of anyone who's been more philanthropic in this city in my 33 years here than Howard Girdlestone. The man he worked with the Park and Rec Department. He's on their foundation, was on their foundation board, the Youth Center, and a myriad of other, Sequoia Hospital, and those are only the ones we know about. He was very supportive of just a myriad of things in town. And I would ask my fellow council members if we could perhaps agendize an item to see if we could honor him in a more substantial way. So I would hope that I'd get a couple of folks that agree with me that we could agendize, if the city manager would do that, and see if we could honor him in a more substantial way.
I would support that.
Yeah, likewise, I think that's a great idea.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Appreciate it. And that's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Bob. I had a very nice summer vacation, but we did have quite a few public events sprinkled in there. I brought a few photos of some. A few? Just a few. I know. I had a week of staycation, and I had to put a suit on 4 different times, so wasn't much of a vacation. But I did want to share a couple highlights. So this is back to school week in San Carlos. It's a very exciting week for my family because my daughter is starting kindergarten. I just came from the ice cream social for new kindergartners at Britton Acres. One big accomplishment for the city was persuading Samtrans to get a new bus line in town. And I had a chance to ride that bus line on Thursday with our school board president, Kathleen Farley, and with Gene Daner, who was one of the volunteers who worked very diligently on this project. So this was 7:10 in the morning or 7:20 in the morning Carlmont kids, because Tierra Linda hasn't started back up, but I was very pleased to see a lot of ridership. And I've heard that there's a lot of interest from Tierra Linda parents as well. And so I think this is a big success. It's going to take a lot of cars off the road. It's going to help get kids to school, teach them some independence. So thanks to our staff who helped work on this. I'm just thrilled beyond belief. I also had a chance to talk to some exchange students from our sister city. As some people may know, we have a sister city in Japan, Omura, Japan, which is in the Nagasaki area. And I'm pictured here with 4 students who are the seated students. And then in the back is their host families who were in both San Carlos and Belmont. So the Belmont and San Carlos students went to Japan for 2 weeks and stayed with families there. And then the Japanese students came and stayed here. They got to go to a San Francisco Giants game, Great America, and they even got to come and meet me. So they seemed a bit confused as to why they were meeting me, but I did my best. So it was a great program. In the back here is John Hoffman and Ed Sanders, who helped organize, who are part of the Sister City organization. They did a great job, put together a very great program for the kids. One of the days I put on a suit, Bob and I went up to Sacramento with our city attorney and city manager. We had an opportunity to meet with the governor's office and with our state senator, Jerry Hill, and our state assemblyman, Kevin Mullen. It was an opportunity to talk about a lot of issues facing the city. We talked about housing. We talked about general affordability issues. We also were there specifically looking to support some grant funding for our Holly 101 interchange project. But it was a good meeting, and I think there was a lot of positive sentiment about what we're doing in San Carlos and about that project in particular. I've been doing a monthly Ask the Mayor event at the San Carlos Farmers Market. I was there yesterday, and Don Horsley from the county supervisor, or our county supervisor who represents this district, joined me. Really appreciate everybody who came out, lots of good questions. The number one question, of which I think at least 6 people asked me, and I'm looking at you, Mr. Savay, was what's going on with Wheeler Plaza and why are all these boarded up storefronts on Laurel Street? And it's not looking that great. So I'm hoping we can at least, we should reach out to the developer who owns that property, but I got a lot of concern about our downtown looking pretty shabby with all those storefronts boarded up. So, and I know we're a bit behind schedule, but lots of good questions and a lot of requests, which I'll be working on this week to get some resolution to. So I have Kevin Mullen is confirmed to come to the farmers market with me in October. Jerry Hill says he wants to do it. I think I'm also going to do one with our school board president. What I wanted to ask my colleagues is that we had originally scheduled a certain amount of farmers market meetings per year, or per year, which was like one a month or something. And so in this case, we did it unstaffed, which was a bit of a little bit of a logistical hassle for both us and for the chamber. So what I'm wondering is if we can increase the staff time at the farmers market to another session per month, and see if anybody had any objection to that.
I don't. I'm good.
Okay. All right. Great. I appreciate it. And then lastly, Mark and I had an opportunity this afternoon to attend the ribbon cutting of the new Arroyo School. This is the 4th and 5th grade school. It's the first of 2 schools that are going to be opened in San Carlos. Another one is going to be opened on the Tierra Linda campus next year. It's a really beautiful school that has shared learning spaces and a maker space, and it's just a state-of-the-art, beautiful campus. These are school board members and Robert Porter, who works for the school district. This is the result of Measure H, which was passed in 2012, which was a bond measure that the city, or the citizens of San Carlos, decided that they wanted to invest in additional school classrooms for our students. And so it was a great event, and it's sort of a testament to the willingness of people in San Carlos to continue to invest in their schools. Lastly, I'll echo the comments. I know that Bob and Ron knew Howard a lot more than I did, but I did have a chance to meet him on a couple of occasions. He, in addition to what they said, you know, he just seemed like a wonderful man. He was a World War II veteran. He was, you know, a great benefactor to our town. He was our Citizen of the Year in 2001. There's a lot of things in San Carlos that bear his name due to generous financial contributions to the city. So I think it's great that we put something on the agenda where we try to find a way to honor him, and I'll say that we'll adjourn tonight's meeting in honor of his memory.
Through the chair.
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Mayor, regarding increasing the frequency of staffing at the farmers markets events, I would actually appreciate it if Mr. Malpe, if Jeff would let me know what the cost of doing that is, because I'm kind of curious. Not necessarily in real time here, but just when you figure it out.
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. All right. So we'll move on to item 4B, staff comments on city administrative business. Mr. Malpe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few things this evening. Quick update on line 147, just because it's been a while since we've met. The situation really hasn't changed much since the last time I spoke to the council. Line 147 remains in its low pressure shut-in state that it's been operating in now for some time. The inline inspections have been completed. PG&E is still going through and reviewing all that data. We've got a copy of the report. We've hired Dr. Stevick, an expert out of UC Berkeley who worked with us a couple years ago to review the information as well. So we'll be looking to get that report back. We'll make Dr. Stevick's findings available to the public, as well as the PG&E report. There's a number of other reports that PG&E will be doing. As a result of the inline inspection, about 4 different sites were repaired. About 6 weeks ago, those repairs were finished. Based on PG&E's review of the data, they believe there could be, at minimum, another 5 or 6 spots that they're going to make repairs on the pipeline, or at least, I shouldn't say make repairs, but they'll at least want to do an excavation there, and if they find anything, make repairs at that time. We haven't gotten the information on the specific locations yet. We'll be meeting with them later this week to review their dig plan, which they have not submitted to us as to date. So there's still some work to do on line 147, but it does remain in its low-pressure shut-in state.
Through the chair,
Yes, Mark.
if I may. So, Jeff, this is the repairs done on the line that I've heard a number of senior PG&E engineering executives say was basically good for 500 years, correct?
Yeah, I remember them saying that as well, yes.
And the line is like maybe, what, 50 years old?
Yeah, probably on average, that's probably about how old it is.
Interesting. Thank you.
You bet. A couple other quick things. As the council's aware, and I think the staff's aware, but I'm sure not everybody in the public's aware, that our Parks and Rec Director, Christine Boland, has retired from the city. She's been dealing for a number of months with some family issues that she just felt were going to require a lot more of her attention going forward. So we were very sorry to see Christine go after about 20 years with the city of San Carlos as both the city clerk and in an appointed and elected capacity, and our Parks and Rec Director. Amy Newby, who's here, say hi, Amy, is going to be taking over as our acting Parks and Rec Director for the time being. And Amy's been sort of filling in that capacity the last several months, done a great job, so we're all really excited and proud to be working with Amy in this capacity moving forward. And then I thought we'd end right back where we began with the Peninsula Clean Energy, which will be launching in San Mateo County in October. There have been several mailers that have been put out to customers about the change in the electrical service provider, and pointing out that customers can opt out if they wish to stay with PG&E. There will be a workshop Tuesday, September 6th at 6:30 p.m. In the library on the second floor in the community rooms, where folks can come if they have any specific questions they want to be answered by the Peninsula Clean Energy folks. That's all I've got this evening.
Thank you, Jeff. If I could just add one piece of clarification to that. So for those folks who choose to stay with Peninsula Clean Energy is the generator, but so they are working on the generation side of the electricity. But PG&E is still billing you, is still doing all the transmission, and is still providing service to your house. So it's just a switch in who is controlling the upstream generation with the goal of increasing the renewable content of the electricity. Okay. Now we will move on to presentations. Item 5A, an update from the Vector Control District on rodent concerns in San Carlos. Good evening.
So I'm sure I've spoken with many of you before, but it's nice to get to see you in person. My name is Megan Caldwell. I'm the Public Health Education and Outreach Officer for San Mateo County Mosquito and Vector Control District. We're the public agency that provides mosquito and other vector control throughout San Mateo County. And one of the vectors that we work with is rodents. And about a year ago, we began hearing from residents of San Carlos that some of the neighborhoods had a severe and ongoing problem with roof rats. Unfortunately, roof rats are very common in San Mateo County. They tend to like the same kinds of neighborhoods that we do. They like all the really nice vegetation and the ivy and the fruit trees and the lush landscaping. They really enjoy all that. It's very pretty. And we kept hearing that there were issues. So in the past year, we've done around 200 property inspections for residents of San Carlos for rodent complaints. We've also been doing ongoing public outreach, including holding a community meeting. We've been posting on Nextdoor. We've been working with the city to get the word out about the things that people can do to remedy their rodent issues. We've also been doing ongoing rodent control in the creeks. The roof rats tend to be located along these creeks where the water is. But the bad news is that a rodent infestation is a community-wide problem, and it requires a community-wide solution. And just unfortunately, a lot of the issue, the source of these problems is located on private property where, unfortunately, the Vector Control District has very limited enforcement capabilities. We're not a public agency that can write tickets. We can go in and we can say, you should put your garbage in closed containers, you should clean up and cut back your vegetation, you should pick up your fallen fruit. But ultimately, we don't have any authority to make people do these things. Or as often is the case, to make people's neighbors do these things. So we would like to propose to the city to implement a different sort of program for your residents. What we would like to do with the city's cooperation and the cooperation of the residents is to implement a sort of neighborhood watch for rodents, where we would help organize residents into community rodent prevention teams to do a lot of work in doing outreach, helping their neighbors understand, you know, what the issues are, what needs to be changed, so that instead of kind of moving the problem from one property to another as we clean things up, that we eliminate the rodents sort of in one neighborhood at a time. And that would also enable us to kind of get cooperation on private property where we aren't able to force people to do anything. You know, we've conducted some preliminary surveys, and it looks like the residents of San Carlos are really uniquely very interested in cooperating. We've had people say they're willing to help their neighbors clean up vegetation or help their neighbors do rodent proofing of structures, especially the elderly neighbors who aren't able to do that for themselves. And we believe that this sort of program would be not only very well received in San Carlos, but very successful as well. So we're looking to start that this fall once our West Nile virus season winds down and before the weather turns nasty and starts driving the rats indoors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions? Matt?
Just for staff to go forward with the program that she's proposing, would we need to agendize some type of action item?
I don't believe so, no. We're bringing this to you for an update, but we're planning on participating with the program as long as the council didn't have any objections tonight.
Okay.
Thanks, Matt. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of quick questions. I always like to try and understand the context of this sort of relative to what our situation may have been in the past, because I remember earlier conversations, which I don't think were with you, I think they were with staff, that that it may be the case that the rat population isn't necessarily higher, but that the environmental conditions like the drought basically were driving them into contact with people. And I'd just be interested in your perspective on that, or any other factor that may be causing changes.
Yeah, so that's entirely possible. Obviously, rats need basically three things to survive. They need food, water, and shelter. And when there's a drought, there's going to be a lot less food and water down in the creeks, and they're going to start moving in closer proximity. Rats can also be displaced by construction. And I know you guys have had new school construction and some other things going on that may have displaced rats and caused them to move into neighborhoods where they weren't accustomed to seeing quite so many rats. But there also is just the factor that we have a lot of roof rats in our county, unfortunately.
Yeah, that was actually my next question. Just I'm not sure what the right metric is, rats per square meter or whatever, but I mean, in fact, one would hope that would be significantly less than a single digit, but what is the prevalence?
So I can't really give you a number, but I can tell you that we're getting more rodent complaints and requests for inspections from San Carlos. Unfortunately, you all accounted for more than half of our rodent complaints all of last year. So if that kind of gives you some perspective.
Okay. And you don't know of any factor other than perhaps burgeoning or intrusive rat population that would cause us to be differential to other communities?
Some of that may be awareness as well. We as an agency started using Nextdoor fairly recently, and we found that that gets us a lot of exposure in a brief period of time. And it sort of sets off a cascade of people telling their neighbors, oh, you can get a free rodent inspection, and then they all call us the same day.
I see. Okay.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's good outreach. Last question about the program you were talking about, a little bit, not too specific, but in terms of the cost of the program, who bears that?
So let me back up a little. The kind of charm of this program is that it empowers the residents of the target community to do the bulk of the work themselves. So the main cost to us as a district is going to be in staff time and expertise. So we're hoping that we would not need to ask the city for really any material support for this at all, beyond maybe printing materials, providing meeting space to do training, perhaps helping purchase some snap traps. Fairly minimal.
Okay. Sounds interesting. Thank you.
Any other questions? I'll just say, Megan, I appreciate you coming, and I'm happy to hear that we're working on something. I have had a number of people reach out with concerns this weekend. When I was at the farmers market, I had 2 separate people come and talk about rats on their property, rats in the sidewalks. It seems to be a lot of it is focused in the White Oaks neighborhood, or at least what I've heard. You said this fall, so when are you thinking of getting started?
So that's going to be something that we need to work out with the various departments within the district, because as I said, this will be a lot of staff time, and we need to make sure that the rest of the health and safety of the county and of San Carlos isn't suffering with a time commitment of this. So preliminarily, I'd say we'd like to get this going in October. But there will be a kind of pre-assessment phase in which there's not going to be a lot of action.
Mm-hmm. And between now and then, what's the advice to residents if they see rats on their property or they see rats in the neighborhood?
So for rats indoors, we strongly recommend that people give us a call. We're at smcmvcd.org, and people can request a free inspection. We'll show them exactly what areas on their home they need to close up and how to get the rats out. For rats in the neighborhood, it's really a matter of making your property less attractive to the rodents. They like food, water, and shelter, so anything they can hide under or eat or drink, if you can take that away from them, that will be a kind of short-term solution until we can get this program going.
And what about traps? I actually had a woman at the farmer's market this weekend who said she was thinking about purchasing a gun, and that she she grew up on a ranch, and that's how they took care of rats where she came from. But I advised her not to do that. But she did talk about traps, and we have a Home Depot in town. We just have now a new Orchard Supply. If people want to go out and buy traps, do you recommend that, and what kind of traps, and where can they get them?
Traps are absolutely available from any hardware store. We just recommend caution when setting them. A trap that's designed to kill a rat can break an adult's finger if you manage to get your finger caught in it. Mm-hmm. And we're asking that the public, if they use those traps outdoors, to please use them in a tamper-proof bait station to keep children, pets, and wildlife from accidentally getting caught.
Okay, great.
Through the chair. And if anybody wants 4 rat traps, which I purchased from Orchard Supply Hardware, because it turns out rats also like tomatoes, something I didn't realize. But I realized after I bought them that they probably wouldn't be a good fit with my dog. So if you don't have a dog and you want rat traps, let me know.
All right. Well, we really appreciate you coming tonight. I hope you can come back when you get the program up and running and give us a report on how it's going and what we can do to be supportive.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you. All right. Item 6 is public comment for items that are not on the agenda. This evening, I have no speaker cards for general public comment. Is there anyone who would wish to speak on public comment for items not on the agenda? Okay. Then we'll move on to the item 7, approval of the consent calendar. Consent items are considered to be routine and will be enacted in one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action. Is there anyone wishing to remove an item from the consent agenda? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move that we approve consent calendar items A through M and adopt ordinance number 1511, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos amending Chapter 10.32.170, parking, prohibited times and locations of the San Carlos Municipal Code to create a no parking zone along the east side of El Camino Real between Cherry Street and Arroyo Avenue.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Crystal, please call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Johnson?
Yes. All right, now we'll move on to item 8, reports to council. 8A, receive a presentation outlining the drainage concerns on Primrose Lane. Mr. Walter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Jay Walter, Public Works Director. Welcome back from your summer break. Staff's been busy as we've had a few things to kind of work on while you're gone, and so we'll jump right into this one. Tonight we're bringing you information on a concern that's been raised over on Primrose Lane, which is a private street in the city, and a drainage issue that staff's been working on with residents there for a number of years, and council asked that this be brought back to provide information and have an opportunity to talk and also hear from the residents of that street as well. So, just to give you a little background, Primrose Lane is a private cul-de-sac which intersects Exborn Avenue, and it's maintained by the residents living on the street. So the city doesn't have any maintenance responsibility for the street itself. However, there is a public utility easement through which a sewer line runs, as well as there was a drainage swale that was placed when the development first occurred, which conveys water from a city storm drain. And then Primrose Lane in the general vicinity of Barford Avenue and Lyndhurst Avenue. So it's kind of over towards the edge by city of Belmont. So back in 1960, the city staff was able to find a plan that showed that a concrete drainage swale was to be constructed with the development of that particular area. And as we have some pictures to show where that swale is located, I'll move into that now. And again, just giving council and the public some idea of the area we're talking about. Primrose Lane in this area right here, pretty much hidden by trees and such. Exborn Avenue down on the bottom end, and then up on the top is Lyndhurst, and then Barford down the side. So this is the plan that I was speaking to you of a moment ago. This was a plan that we brought out of our city engineering files, and it's labeled here with the Primrose Lane alignment in this particular location. And the note on the plan, construct surface drainage, field located concrete gutter. And that essentially is what was built as part of that subdivision at the time. At least that's on the plan that the city has in its possession. And you can also see that there is a sewer line that was essentially established in the same general vicinity. And then again, Barford Street here, Exborn on the far side, and then Lyndhurst is the area on the far right upper. And so now we'll look at some pictures of the swale itself. So what you're looking at is the very uppermost end of the drainage swale, the concrete swale in this configuration, and then the city's storm drain pipe, which comes from essentially an inlet up on Lyndhurst, and it comes down through between a couple of properties and outlets into this concrete swale. And again, following the swale, as it comes down alongside the property at 18 Primrose, we come through the area, and you can see that it's essentially kind of draining from the driveway area, from some of the slope areas here. And the picture on the right, same thing a little further down, and you can see there's another little swale that comes down, capturing some drainage and conveying it into that swale in this area as well. And you can see that When these pictures were taken, it looks like back in 2010, maybe a time of year when we had some nuisance drainage, at least at the time, that showed that the swale is regularly carrying water. And then as we go a little further down the hill, we come down past the a driveway area here, which has some asphalt placed in the swale that is providing for access to the driveway. And then again, the swale continues down Primrose Lane. And then now I switch your view. In this picture, we're looking up the hill. The picture on the right, we're looking down the hill. And this is the swale as it proceeds down the hill adjacent to 11 Primrose Lane, which is Mr. Basorti's residence. And the area here, the notes that were taken, the original issue, as we understand it, was that the swale itself seemed to have settled to the right, and so water was kind of washing across the right side of it onto Mr. Basorti's property, creating some erosion and some problem during periods of flow. And then again, looking at the swale, we're looking on the picture on the left, we're looking in the downward direction as we come down to a point where a pipe has been installed at this point just upstream from the driveway to Mr. Basorti's property. And again, looking back up the hill again in that swale area, in the same area that I was talking about where there was some of the washover on the right side of that swale. And then getting down to the lower end, here's the pipe that comes underneath his driveway and then outlets into the swale. And then the picture on the right, it kind of completes it from the end of the pipe down to the point where it empties out onto Exborn. So that gives you a picture of the swale area on the property along the private street, Primrose Lane. And what I have for you here, I hope it plays, and I apologize for the angle. This was the best we could do, but this is a video of water flowing in the swale, and this was taken by Mr. Basorti some time back, and I'm sure under his comment time for you, Council, he can give you a little bit more context as to when this video was taken. But it was given to us just as an example of water flowing in the swale. So I'll, if you don't mind kind of kinking your neck around a little bit to watch this, we'll get it playing. And this is looking back up at the pipe outlet for the swale, now coming down. Water flowing in the swale, and now we're reaching down to the first driveway, and the water flows across that first driveway, and then the water goes, it's back into the swale, down now along the frontage of Mr. Basorti's property. And you can recognize the curb bumps that are there from the other photographs. And then that water is, you can see a little bit of that water as it tips across the side, the right side of that swale. And then the view turns back, looking back up the swale, back towards where the water was coming from. And then it ends. So again, I'll just give you an example of the water that's flowing, that flows in the swale. And I'll let Mr. Basorti describe that, the context again for that video to be taken. So looking at the problem that when it was first presented to us, the issue was that the residents had identified this swale as problematic, that it was not properly conveying the water from the city's, essentially the city's storm drain pipe through the easement and swale on Primrose Lane to the end when it outletted onto Exborn Avenue. So my staff, in meeting with Mr. Basorti, we went through a calculation where we determined what we felt the proper drainage area was, because we felt like, well, you know, there is some city water that's running down through here, so we want to make sure that we're providing, you know, some assistance where needed. At first, we believe, well, it's a private street, then it should be something that's maintained by the private property owners along that street. But since we do have water that's conveyed from our storm drain above, from Lyndhurst Avenue drainage, that comes down through and goes in and uses the swale, well, then one of the things we could offer was a compromise and a sharing of costs for repairs to the swale that we may do. So we came up with what we thought was a good plan for repairing the swale, essentially creating a higher side on the right side of the swale as we go down past Basorti's property, so that the water would be kept from flowing across the right side down onto his property. And if it was going to be redirected, it would be redirected out into the middle of the Primrose Lane street. So just as give the council some context of the area here, these areas that are circled in green dash, Primrose Lane, plus these properties here in the kind of upper reach of Primrose Lane, those are the ones that we included the area of to calculate some of the stormwater flow that would contribute to the swale. The area on Lyndhurst that's circled in the dashed red line, this represents the street area on Lyndhurst that we originally calculated into our drainage area for water flowing into that pipe. As you can see, it's pretty much a low spot. There's a high point here, a high point here, and then the water in between flows into the pipe at this location. Now, we were given some information over the weekend from one of the residents on Primrose Lane that we may have not included enough area in the drainage calculations. So we went back and we took a look, and interestingly enough, as we looked at the area, if I can get my mouse back up in here, it was suggested that perhaps the homes that are along the top side of Lyndhurst also drain down to Lyndhurst. And we determined that, sure enough, at least the driveway areas and there's roof leaders on 3 of the homes that have outlets that go through the curb face into the street drain. So we felt like, okay, we'll increase our area because that makes sense that contributes to the water that's on Lyndhurst that would be in the city system. And then on the other side of the street, on the lower side, it was suggested that perhaps some homes here could be included in that drainage calculation. But as we looked at that, there really is no connection anywhere to this pipe. So we believe that trying to include these into the drainage that comes down through from Lyndhurst wouldn't be an appropriate inclusion. So at least at this moment in time, we've left out those properties as it relates to water that comes out of the pipe at the bottom as it empties into the storm drain swale. So looking at those, we revised our drainage calculations, and we had initially figured a 50-50 split. We figure now we would be in the range of 55% city, 45% for the private residents along Primrose. So we feel like that's something that we've at least made an adjustment for. Again, this is something that city staff has calculated, and if the residents wanted to sit down and meet and talk about this more carefully and exactly, that would be fine with us. But up to this point in time, that hasn't occurred. So looking at this, the drainage calculations give us the area, that gives us the flow, and then that's how much flow that we felt was needed to be conveyed through the drainage swale on Primrose. And so we felt there was a share between the private properties and the city's public area as well. So improvement options, what was originally proposed as an improvement option, number 1, which is a new valley gutter along a 100-foot piece of the drainage swale, which has a curb on the side of it, essentially a 6-inch curb, which keeps water from flowing off the side of it, keeps the water directed in the swale, and we had originally estimated a construction cost of about $21,000. Another option that was suggested, and the Primrose Lane residents have mentioned this in their correspondence to the council, was, well, what about undergrounding the system? Because the water that exits through the drainage swale as surface flow is a nuisance. It's unpredictable. You don't always know how much water is going to be coming down. Could be more, could be less, but it's a nuisance by the fact that it comes through and it's a surface flow. So when we look at undergrounding that storm drain system under Primrose Lane, that is putting the pipe outlet directly into another pipe under the ground along Primrose Lane, we felt that we would want to extend that pipe to connect to another underground storm drain system. Because if we were going to make an improvement like that, instead of simply just putting it underground on Primrose Lane, we felt strongly that we would want to go ahead and put it underground along Exborn to a point where we can get to another storm drain manhole. That tentatively has been estimated at about $330,000 if we were to go ahead with that particular option. And again, these are options which we've just looked at for since we've had the suggestion that an underground system might be an appropriate way to go. So again, looking at this option 2 in a little bit more detail, here's our current storm drain pipe coming down from Lyndhurst. Here's the Primrose Lane drainage swale. And then we take and connect this pipe down through to this particular storm drain connection. That's the approach that we would like to take if we were to make this an underground project. So at this point, I could take questions from council. I know that some residents from Primrose Lane are here and they'd like to address the council, but I'd like to just tell you that I believe that we have worked in good faith with the residents there to discuss the issue, come up with what we felt was a fair solution and a cost-sharing arrangement. We drafted an agreement which we shared with the residents. Mr. Pizorti and our city attorney went back and forth on that agreement some time back, and we were ready to sign and proceed ahead with a construction project. But we didn't get that opportunity to do that. There was a response, essentially no response back from the residents at a point, and so we didn't carry forward with the project because we didn't have an agreement and or an arrangement to do cost sharing for that. So at this point, since it's been brought back to the council's attention, you wanted to know more about it, and that's kind of the staff side of this issue.
Okay. Thanks, Jay. Why don't we take a few questions for Jay, and then we will turn it over to the residents. Let's start with Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Jay. In no particular order, and some of these I think you touched on, but I want to make sure I understood you. When was the pipe and the existing swale built relative to when, I guess, that area of Lyndhurst was developed and Primrose Lane was built? I mean, did one precede the other, or?
As we understand it from the planning, the Lyndhurst pipe was in place, which was then outletted to the Primrose Lane swale gutter that was built after that. So we believe the pipe was first, and it had drained the area of Lyndhurst, and then the swale was built when the Primrose Lane properties were subdivided.
So that means that there was some period of time where there was a pipe that came partway down the hill, and there were no houses there because Primrose Lane hadn't been built, and the water just ran down the hill until it got to the storm drain?
As I understand it. Again, I don't have any real.
I know you weren't here then.
No, wasn't here then, but my sense is that probably drained into a drainage swale or a creek, because that area is generally sloped kind of into a valley at that point.
Okay. And was the storm drain inlet that we saw at the bottom of the swale, was that built when Primrose Lane was built?
You're talking about the.
Yes. You just no. Well, let's see. That's looking.
This is at the very bottom.
Oh, that's at the bottom.
Bottom of the swale on Primrose Lane. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, so this was the way it connected to Exborn, and it actually flows now in the gutter down Exborn.
Oh, I see.
So there is no inlet.
Yeah.
There's no inlet at the bottom of Exborn right now. It simply flows out into the curb gutter along Exborn.
Okay. Thank you. Do you have a sense, and this one may be kind of a little bit difficult to determine because you weren't here and it was a long time ago, but it was interesting to me that the system involves a pipe coming down the hill and then a swale, as opposed to a pipe that goes all the way down the hill. Do you have any sense about why it was built that way?
I really couldn't say. One possible speculation on that is that many drainage systems of that era, which I would say the 50s into the 60s, relied on surface flow. The examples that you see in the White Oaks neighborhood, where we have very few drainage inlets, and we have lots of surface flow that comes down through areas that accumulate a lot of water before they finally they go into an inlet somewhere downstream.
Okay. Given what you told me in the earlier question about how, essentially, in simple form, Primrose Lane was built after the Lyndhurst was built and there was this flow coming down the hill, do we have any insight into what documentation or came up during the approval process? I presume there is an approval process even when a private road gets built. Somebody has to ask to get plans approved, and this discussion of doing something with the water coming down the hill must have been, at least, well, I'm assuming it was addressed. How was it addressed, if it was addressed?
So I presume that as the property came forward to be subdivided, and the public improvements needed to be specified and laid out for that development, The engineer of the developer met with the city engineer at the time, talked about, okay, what was needed. Are we going to have to do sewer, storm drain, what else, all the things that are going to be required, and proposed ideas then which came to the city, which were then approved by the city, and then those were constructed.
So there was some, for lack of a better term, negotiation process that went on between the property owner and or developer and the city at the time.
I believe so.
Okay. Do we have any sense about whether those early discussions touched on who, or maybe we know who paid for the construction of the swale? I presume the private road was paid for by the developer.
As I understand it, this has been a private road since it was first installed, so I believe that the swale was installed at that time, and it was maintained to be maintained by the private property owners.
I see, by the private property owners. Okay, and then last question, at least for now, is you gave us an option to a longer pipe, basically, a longer undergrounding mechanism, which goes past this bottom point here. Is there a reason why we didn't just say, what would it cost to put an underground pipe to get to that same point on X-Burn and then just let the water go the way it is now?
My preference is that we would once we put that water under the ground, we keep it under the ground and get it into the system that is of manholes and inlets and underground pipes. The idea that it is engineering, it's feasible from an engineering standpoint to have that pipe come down and then, say, bubble out at the bottom of Primrose Lane. We have a few of those around town where we call them bubblers, where it's an outlet that actually the water bubbles out and then flows down the curb and gutter. So it's not unique in the city. We have them in different locations. My preference from an engineering standpoint is that we not have those because they're more difficult to control. And once we have pipes under the ground, then I think we've got a better situation with a closed conduit system that usually it can accommodate a little more flow because it gets a little bit of hydraulic pressure to push the water through it.
And I understand that. Given that, could you hazard a guess on, I think you said option 2 with the more robust solution was about $300,000. What would it be if it was, to use your term, ended up as just a bubbler?
I'd look at it as probably in the neighborhood of $150,000.
About half the cost.
A little less than half the cost, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Bob?
A couple of questions. I guess actually one for Mr. Resorti, or maybe you know, when that video was taken, it wasn't raining, was it? No, that was just like a fire hydrant being let loose up at the top? Okay, so that just to make sure everybody understood that was just a fire hydrant. It wasn't rain. God knows if depending on how much flow would come through. Is it possible to cover that? Or maybe you're talking about maybe it's the bubbling thing. In other words, the swale, put a top on it, or put a plastic pipe on it, or put a plastic pipe that attaches to the top, go all the way back to the top, and just put a plastic pipe that comes down, or cover it. You know what I'm saying? Just so now the water can't get out.
It would be the difficulty in that would be trying to keep it maintained.
Okay.
If you have a low height and wide, say, passageway for the water, you're going to tend to get some things that will get clogged in there. Yeah. So it'll be tougher to maintain. So a full sort of circular culvert that would be, set just below grade would be a better option. But covering the swale, it's been done before, and there's what we call part circle pipes that are more like little half moon shapes that you can use in areas where you have no ability to excavate down below.
But it's possible, and would you? And again, we haven't bid this out. Would that be cheaper than replacing the swale or fixing it?
No, it would not be.
So it'd be still about the same cost.
I won't hazard a guess at the cost of that covering that swale area. I think this particular area where we've got 100 foot of swale to replace is about as simple a process and project as could be done to solve the problem.
Okay, if it was. And I'm not saying we should, but if it was covered, would it be plastic or concrete, or would you even hazard? If that had to be it, would it be plastic or?
I don't think it would be plastic, and the reason why would be I would want to make sure that it was durable enough that if a vehicle did get on it, it wouldn't crush it.
It wouldn't crush it. Okay, all right. Those are the only two questions I had, because again, I was myself and Mr. Grocott walked that 2 and 3 times, so I know a little bit more about it than perhaps some of my colleagues. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Matt?
Before I ask a question, I just wanted to say, because this has been an ongoing issue for a long, long time, and I know I believe it's been dealt with in one form or another. You're the third city engineer or public works director to look at this, and I appreciate the fact that it's under your administration that it has come before the council finally and is being addressed the way that it is. So thank you for that. A few questions that I have is, some of it has to do with just the mechanics. I don't understand why there would be a 10-inch pipe diameter that comes down the hill, and then you showed us at one of the, I think it's at the Basorti residence actually, it flows into a 6-inch pipe.
That's the photo on the left side of the picture right there.
Isn't that bad engineering?
That is, that pipe was installed by the property owner.
Okay.
So the city was not involved in that, and primarily because we don't have a maintenance responsibility on that street or that swale. It happened, and so I don't know that the city had any involvement in that decision.
Would that be the same then for the person that paved over the swale?
Yes.
Yes. And that probably answers one of my other questions in terms of these areas where there is the ability for things to clog, like this 6-inch pipe. The city doesn't go out and maintain that, and that's up to the property owners to keep those clean and free-flowing.
That's correct.
Okay. Next question is the effect of using streets to drain water. So in the event when there's a major storm and more water comes down the swale than it can handle, which we even saw in that video to some degree, and then it spills out onto the private road here, or just in general, when we use our streets to drain water, albeit events where there's just tons of rain, what does that do to the paving?
As long as it's not a prolonged inundation where the water doesn't drain away, the pavement surfaces are generally able to, they'll absorb some of that water through the pavement down into the subgrade, and then the rest of that water will flow into the low areas down the drain. And I don't think that it has a real detrimental effect to it.
Okay. Are there any NPDES issues when we're looking at things like this? Because of, when I ask that question, I'm looking at the two options you've given us. So are there any issues with that and the requirements we have when it comes to water that's being surface drained as opposed to water that we're putting in a pipe and then draining?
The emphasis on the new municipal regional permit, which is the NPDES requirements, is to infiltrate as much water as possible. So as redevelopment occurs, the conditions for that redevelopment oftentimes include a condition that you may not allow any more water than what was in a prior development stage to exit the property and go into the storm drain system. So sometimes impervious areas have to be drained to an area that will infiltrate on the property. Sometimes they have, in larger projects, they'll be captured in storm drain vaults. And that water can be reused, or it can infiltrate to the bottom of those vaults. So from an NPDES standpoint, what we're worried about is if there's more water that is coming from impervious surfaces that's entering that drainage stream. But if we're really not making any change, then I don't see this as an issue. If we were to correct what we consider to be the bad grade of the swale itself, it would be like there would have been no more detrimental impact to that from an NPDES perspective.
I see. Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Mark, you had another question?
Yes, actually. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two other quick ones prompted by Bob and some of Bob's and Matt's comments. And this first one may be a Greg question. Given the approvals and arrangements that were arrived at years ago, what maintenance responsibility does the city have for this situation? I'm not trying to put Jay on the spot, but I heard him say several times that the city doesn't have maintenance responsibility. So I just want to make sure I understand the dynamics of this contract.
Well, my understanding is there's no maintenance agreement at all. Normally on private property, the city doesn't have the right to enter private property without a dedicated easement for this purpose or a maintenance agreement. So right now there's no maintenance agreement. My understanding is the swale itself is largely as it was originally built in 1960, and there's been some, as you can see from the photographs, some new inlets have been added into the swale, and I think there's a second swale that originates from another piece of property that uses this drainage swale. So it's been pretty substantially modified from the beginning without the city's input or any engineering input from the city.
And that gets us back to Jay's earlier comment that this was built after discussions between the then city engineer and the developer's engineer by the developer.
I think I'll shorthand that a little bit. I'm not an engineer, but I think what happened there was that the engineer for the developer and the city engineer agreed that the swale was adequate to carry and convey the water from Lyndhurst, given the circumstances that existed back in 1960. And perhaps with the foreseeable circumstances after that.
Got it. And then my second question, Jay, was I realized I forgot to ask you, what damage have we been told has occurred by the swale not handling the water better?
As I understand it, it's been in the area that you can see on the photo on the right side of the image that's here now. Essentially the area that's along the fence, Mr. Bizzordi's fence. The water has been kind of slipping over the outside edge of that and then washing away some of the landscaping area that is between the swale and the fence on this particular area of his property. That's the way the issue had been characterized to me, and that was the way we moved forward with trying to create a correction to that problem.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions. You mentioned this bubbler option. Is that a viable option?
Of course it's a viable option. We have them all around. It's a standard engineering solution that you could use if we chose to go that direction, yes.
But we just don't know the cost of it.
Well, I just know that it's going to cost less than extending that system underground a much greater distance. I just didn't cost it out ahead of tonight's meeting.
But you think probably substantially more than the $21,000 solution?
Yes.
Okay. Excuse me. Option two, this $330,000 to underground the whole thing. It seems like a lot of money. I mean, do you have any idea what percentage of the budgeted funds we have for annual storm drain maintenance that might represent?
I'm trying to think of the current year. I know we've gone forward with some approval of sediment removal projects and some storm drain improvement projects, which we typically, I think it's somewhere in the range of about $250,000 that we use for fixing up inlets and pipes and other kinds of things at various locations around the city. So that's probably in the neighborhood there. So it represents a significant amount of what the council has committed to storm drain improvement.
You said $250,000 for all of the repairs all year, so this is...
Well, right, but we also have some funding that's been set aside for some sediment removal, and I just don't remember that number off the top of my head.
All right, so this represents a big chunk.
That would be a big chunk of the money, yes.
Okay, and I know I asked you this question earlier today when we talked, but I just want to make sure I understand that the changes to the area, in other words, the number of homes, the usage of the land, and that sort of thing over the last 50 years, is it substantially different today than it was, say, in 1965?
I guess I would have to. I'm gonna make an assumption because I don't know exactly.
Right.
But the homes above on Lyndhurst were in place. I don't know exactly when all the homes on Primrose were built, but they were built beginning after 1961. I believe Mr. Bizzordi's home was built in 1961. But so it probably in the area of 65 to 70 would probably have substantially the same homes and infrastructure that's there now.
All right, so let's say in the last 40 years, conservatively speaking, not a lot of changes in the number of houses and the usage of the land in terms of landscaping and that sort of thing.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Bob?
thought of a couple more quick ones. City Attorney, so I see the item on the agenda. It says receive a presentation outlining the drainage concerns on Primrose Lane. So if we decided to do something, we'd give direction to staff to set up some other item for our approval at another meeting?
Exactly. You'd be giving some general direction, and then staff would move forward with that.
Okay. And the other thing is, relative to maintenance, as you mentioned, the city hasn't maintained, anything because it's private. But agreements can either have maintenance. You could make an agreement that the city might maintain, or partially maintain, or not maintain, or the agreement would be wide open depending on how the council decided to do it.
Yeah, well, we would. I think we'd be open to considering how to approach a maintenance agreement for this, but the choices are generally the property owners agree to maintain it, or the city maintains it, or there's a divided responsibility.
What I'm saying is it's an item that can be discussed.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Bob. Matt, did you have an additional question?
Yeah, just a question. It seems like some time ago, I can't remember when it was, it might have been last year or the year before, we had it in the budget to do something similar to this, except it was on a city street up off of Hilltop. There was a street that I think ran up into Hilltop, and some downward properties were getting water into their front yards. So we did a project like that. I don't remember how much that cost or what all the details were, but was that also a major percent in that annual year budget? Was that a major percentage of the budget to do that?
The only one I'm thinking of that we did at Hilltop and Alameda was where we rebuilt essentially the valley gutter and we call them spandrels and valley gutter areas that are at the intersection with Hilltop and Alameda, and that was $35,000, I believe.
Okay.
So it was not a significant chunk of what we use on an annual basis, but that one was one which a problem had been created by flows from above that came down and basically settled out in front of the property that was there at the corner.
Okay, that I remembered that.
Thanks, Matt. I just have a couple questions. What if we plug the pipe? What would be the impact if that pipe? If there was
the pipe, which pipe?
The upstream pipe.
Then we'd have to figure out a way to route all that drainage from Lyndhurst to another location.
What would happen? Would it flood?
It would overtop the curb and the sidewalk, and would seek a low spot probably through the homes that are on the downside of Lyndhurst.
Okay. And is there any threat to that today with the existing pipe that's there?
Well, generally you have a threat for inlets to be plugged because of debris, or sometimes we find cardboard or other stuff that floats around. So there's definitely a threat there.
But if you restricted I'm not an engineer, but I'm just asking, if you restricted the flow so that the flow was, a quarter of what it is today, would that be sufficient to drain the upstream demand while reducing the amount of water that's coming down the pipe?
Well, I would want to do a calculation that would tell me how much room do I have to store that water, so that as it would be raining and that water would be accumulating, that it wouldn't create a hazard for those homes, and it would have enough time to be able to then slowly drain through the pipe in a smaller diameter down through into the swale. We'd have to do some engineering calculations on that. Okay.
And then I'm just kind of mulling. This is sort of a general principle of fairness, I think, is ultimately the conversation, and it's a difficult one to weigh. But on the one hand, you could say, well, it's, as you said, 55% of the water is coming from residents above, and 45% is coming from people who live on the street. But is this, should we think, and I'm just interested to get your question, hear your response, should we think about it from that perspective about who is contributing to the water that's flowing, or is it really a peak problem, which is to say that the existing swale could convey 45% of the water no problem without it topping the swale, but once you add incremental water, it then, you hit a threshold at which you overtop it and you start to cause property damage? And is it then more a responsibility of thinking about, where what causes that sort of tipping point? And how do you think about it when you're sort of like talking with residents about sharing the burden of costs?
There have been very few, if any, other locations that we've talked to residents about sharing costs for something like this, because this situation with a private street is somewhat unique in the city as it relates to this. The water that culvert from Lyndhurst conveys water from the smallest storm to the largest storm. So it can have a small amount trickling through down into the swale, or it can have quite a bit, certainly as evidenced by the video, which was the fire hydrant flow that came down through there. So I don't see it as I kind of see this as, this is a system which back in the early 60s was determined by the city and the developer of the properties at the time to be a combined system, that it was designed to handle the water from the city system and then be carried in the swale, which would then be contributed to by the properties on Primrose Lane. So I feel like that the engineers at the time made their calculations based on what they determined to be they call it the design storm, which would then be how much water accumulates, goes through the pipe, goes through the swale to be outletted downstream. So my sense is that there's fairness to that arrangement that was made. Would we make that same decision today? I'm not sure I would, because I don't particularly like surface flow. But to get away from that, it requires a significant investment on the city's part. Now, if we did go down the path with a large culvert installation, then we would be talking to the Primrose Lane folks about, well, then what, you'd have to be rebuilding your swale anyway to handle your street drainage. And if there were inlets and things required, then we would again approach them with the idea of sharing some of that cost.
Yeah. And then are you aware of any other residents who currently have concerns about flooding from insufficient swales? 'Cause I seem to recall talking to somebody on Carmelita, but are you aware of others? Are there other sort of known areas where, hey, we have flooding problems because the swale can't handle enough water?
They are fewer. They're more oftentimes located at inlet spots rather than in the swales themselves. Mm-hmm. We do have some swale locations that are alongside some of our streets that they're not in the best condition. Those are ones which we try to get to, but they aren't ones that result in flooding that flows downhill towards a home or something like that. We're pretty careful. They're generally against the side of a slope so that water stays contained against the side of that slope. Most often our problems are related to where we have an inlet that doesn't get enough water into it fast enough, or that gets clogged quickly, that the water then bypasses and goes on down to another point. So we do have a few of those. In the last couple of years, I think we've fixed 40 locations where we've had those, I call them nuisance problems. They're obviously more to the resident than that, but those are the ones that we've been concentrating our money on, because we know that the typical storm, it doesn't produce a whole lot of water, but we want to make sure we can handle it.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jay. Mark, it looks like you have another question.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, two. First one's simple. Jay, do you know roughly when were problems with the overtopping first reported to the city?
I got here in 2012, and well, let me back up a little bit. The photos here, if the date can be believed, it was back in 2010. If it's been, as Matt described it, 3 public works directors, I'm assuming that probably was Robert Weil, maybe Parvis, and if not, it was Al Savay when he was sitting in the chair before I got here. So 2012 was when I got here. 2013 is really when we began to deal with with Mr. Bizzorti and trying to come up with a solution.
So what I was trying to get at is, it's possible that the mechanism that was the design that was arrived at back in the early 1960s presumably worked for 40 years before there were problems.
I think it's safe to say that.
Okay.
Yeah. Given a few years difference, I think it works very effectively over that time.
My next question was prompted by something the mayor was talking to you about, and I just want to be clear about the process when a private property development is approved on a private street. If we were to have something like that come before us today, would the city actually have the ability or perhaps the leverage in negotiation to say, no, this must be an underground pipe. This must be a more sophisticated system? Because you had told us before that the developer actually paid for the swale portion of this. Is the nature, and maybe this is partially a Greg question, is the nature of our authority such that we can say, sorry, you can't do what you want to do if you don't do this?
Yes, the city standards that we use today, they include enclosed conduits, underground conduits for storm drain conveyance. Some small, minor, we'll call it surface flow, can be guided in swales to an inlet to go into a pipe. So we could require a private developer, even if they were going to have a private street, to have a storm drain facility that would be able to capture that water, convey it underground, and connect to a city system outside their development.
Okay, thank you.
And I might add that typically the most recent subdivisions we've had in San Carlos with sort of a cluster development have private driveways, which the developer is required to meet standards to convey the water into the storm drainage system. They're all undergrounded. And there's also the benefit of having CC&Rs. So this type of development wouldn't actually occur right now. We would require CC&Rs and an association that would maintain these types of improvements.
Do we know whether that same schema, structure, approach, set of statutory authorities existed back when this was developed? And I had phrased my question as, what if it came up today, because I was trying to understand it, but was it the same environment back then?
Well, I'll assume there were certain standards that the city required. And again, how all-encompassing those standards were, I can't speak to that because I don't have those documents in front of me, and they're long gone to history. But essentially, they had standards to work with that they agreed with the developer on. So I have to feel that swale was considered to be a standard use for drainage conveyance, and that was what they agreed to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Jeff, did you have any comments you wanted to add? Or?
I just wanted to make sure your question about unfunded storm drain projects was really being addressed, because what I thought I heard you saying, irrespective of swales specifically, was where are we at with storm drain projects in this town? And there are, in fact, tens of millions of dollars of unfunded storm drain projects in San Carlos, and have been, for at least 20 years, 30 years now.
Sure, I think, and I'm aware of that, and I think my specific question was, are there analogous situations where, you're getting runoff into people's front yards, and how might we prioritize this project relative to others? So, I think Jay answered it. Okay, so I think that's all the questions we have. I would like to thank those in the audience for your patience. Now is the time for public comment. I have 4 speaker cards, and our first speaker is William Stipfel. And I'll say that we normally try to hold people to 2 minutes. We have a light agenda tonight, and I know you guys, it's an issue you care a lot about, so hopefully you can keep your time somewhat in the 2-minute ballpark, but I'll invite you to come on up. Good evening.
For all your effort and study and time. Spent a lot of time. You addressed most of my issues. Had some questions that I think I could answer. As far as the flow from when the neighborhood was constructed, I think it's probably a little greater than it was before. The coverage sizes have increased probably on all the properties. Drainage systems are more efficient to direct flow towards driveways and out larger pipes into the street, down the 12-inch pipe, and we've seen that. And where that's not the case, it flows down just naturally and collects in sort of a general funnel and makes its way into that swale eventually. The soil is not really porous at all. It's all bedrock. I think the reason, you can't really see it here, but up at the top, the pipe kind of sits on top of the dirt and it comes out there very high. there's a giant boulder underneath it. So in order to make it any lower, they would have had to have done a considerable amount of blasting or jackhammering or something like that. The pipe's very old. It flows, as you can see here, when there's no rain. So it's probable that the neighbors in that area have tapped into that drain and are using it for their own drainage. I think especially the people that are below Lyndhurst really have nowhere to go besides that drain pipe. So I would invite some more research into who actually is putting into that pipe and what its worthiness is. Because it seems like when there's a good amount of water around it, it collects into that pipe, almost like a French drain would behave. So I think to answer your question about what would happen if you plugged it, I think it would just start leaking out everywhere. I don't think it would back up all the way to Lyndhurst unless it was tighter. Yeah, that's pretty much all I had left.
All right. Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker is Christine Brennan. Good evening.
I feel underdressed. I just got off the soccer field coaching some AYSO, which, by the way, please keep supporting because AYSO is an awesome organization. One thing I just wanted to say, some other folks will talk, but we appreciate the work you guys have did and brought this to us with the offer of 50-50. But the neighbors, the 7 houses on Primrose Lane, all believe that most of that water is coming from the public up above us. So one of the things I would like to take a look back, if possible, is the analysis between Lyndhurst and those homes that fall between Lyndhurst and Primrose. There's this group that Will was just speaking of. I don't think that calculation it's cloudy, right? It was that red cloud there that just doesn't have a number to it, and I think it can make a big difference. So I just wanted to thank you, first of all. Thank you for the first offer. Let you know that the group on Primrose Lane, the consensus was let's take it back to you guys because we felt the number was a little bit different. And maybe take another look at that cloud, that red cloud. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks for your comments. Our next speaker is John Bisorti. Good evening.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, my name is John Bisorti, and I'm the one that caused all these problems, I guess. So the only thing, the main issue I feel is in conflict with Mr. Walter's reports. I'm not an engineer either, as all of you have said, but I have lived there for 35 years, and I've watched this water flow for 35 years. And it only has recently, since 2010, that it's gotten bad. There are 3 houses that use that swale. The other 4 houses on the south side of Primrose empty into the street from their driveways, downspouts, and flow. There's a crown to the street. It flows on the south side of the street. It doesn't get anywhere near the swale until it almost reaches Exborn. And that's our concern. We are, those of us who are using the swale are using it as any other resident in the city. Downspouts, building codes that require downspouts, water flowing away from your property, and that's all we have. And the majority of the water does come from Lyndhurst, whether it's like the flood you saw, would it look like a flood from either the fire department draining their pipes, the city water from Belmont flushing their pipes. It comes down in a rage. And the part on the west side of my driveway, down the hill, seems like we'll carry it. There's a couple of spots where they're broken pieces, but it carries it. This one section is what really has failed. It's listed to the left, and we would love to see it completed. Christine has made a comment about I did verbally accept an agreement, 50-50. And then when we talked again, everyone seemed to think that, it's not all our water, it's the majority of the city water. So we decided not to agree to that compromise. And I have a few options. We asked the city to rebuild a swale. This is the first one. We would like to do that. It's the cheapest, it's the most convenient. We are planning to redo the street, and we've held off on that because we didn't want contractors coming back in later on and building the swale while the street's brand new. So we have a plan to do the street when the swales gets done. Relocate the storm drain. I mean, put it underground, put it into our easement or into the city's easement. That part of the swale is actually on the easement, and then it daylights further to the north of it a bit. Somebody mentioned closing off the pipe. Well, I see that as not an option because that would just make a mess out of Lyndhurst. But could the city extend the easement to include the storm drain so it wouldn't be private property any longer? The easement is, when you're looking at this picture, where that, like where the D is for the mild, it comes straight there, and that's where a sewer line is. And it comes from the left, on the left side of that yellow house. So if they just extended on paper the easement, then the storm drain would be, or the swale would be in the easement, and then we don't have to worry about you repairing private property. And that's all I have.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
And then the last speaker I have is Marilyn Bisorti. Okay. Great. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on public comment on this item? Okay. Well, I think we will have a little bit of a discussion here. I see, Mark, your light is on, so please go ahead.
I had another question or two. Jay, something that Mr. Bisorti said prompted me to, I don't know why I didn't think of this before, and he basically confirmed the notion that from his long residency there, that what's happened is that the swale that was built, I guess, sort of tilted or rotated or collapsed to one side, okay? Is that your sense as well?
That's what my staff kind of surmised from the evidence up there, and that's why we proposed what we have to be the fix. I
guess the question I have is, if the road and the swale were built by the developer who built the neighborhood, let me just put this out there, why is that not a cause of action that the property owners may have against the developer from many years ago? Hey, you made a defective design, you did defective construction.
Far beyond statute of limitations and environmental,
But my point is, but why is it not the case the responsibility is with who built the swale, if the swale is what failed?
Well, again, the length of time that's passed is beyond any sort of standard construction warranty of workmanship or anything like that. So that being said, the fact that the property was developed and there was an agreement with the city that the property owners on Primrose would maintain both the street and the swale, it sort of passed to the residents and the group that they are represented by to maintain that swale. So as time would go by, looking at how the swale is performing, whether there's erosion, whether there's other kinds of problems, it seemed would fall on them for their responsibility.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Bob?
Question, or not a question. Could you go back to the one that shows the red lines, the circle, all those red lines that you have? The cloud. What's the cloud? Got it. That's the cloud? I didn't know.
There's the
I
cloud.
finally found out what the cloud was? Wow.
The cloud.
That's the cloud.
Yes, sir.
How could, and it's been brought up that how could any of that water get into that pipe?
It can't get into that pipe.
Yeah.
Now,
that's what I'm asking. You're talking about houses there that are...
Now, what could happen potentially is that there could be water that comes from those properties that actually, let me get my mouse going here, that maybe comes down the side of the homes through the yards, that comes down the hill, that eventually makes it down here into the area of the swale. But the amount of water coming out of that pipe does not change based on these homes.
I understand.
Because there's no connection to it.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So the contention is, John, the contention is that you think some of the water from those other houses is sort of accumulating into that swale because it can't get in the pipe.
When it's perforated, they've drilled into it,
Well, I'm looking at an engineer saying...
Won't know for sure of that. We don't have an assessment of the inside of that pipe at this point in time.
Okay. Okay, so it's somebody thinks there's holes, somebody thinks there isn't. Okay, all right.
Possible.
Okay, okay. I just didn't know how it could get into the pipe. Okay. The difficulty I mean, this whole thing is always difficult, public, private. Once the city sets a precedent, and I know this is, I'm not meaning to put words in your mouth, but once the city sets a precedent to fix private property, there's a precedent set. And so that's why I was appreciative of my colleagues asking, are there other situations in the city that this requires? So that's one of the issues that we're going to have to discuss tonight. So that's one that's very high on my list, I know.
Thanks, Bob. Matt?
So my evaluation of this is, I think, pretty simple, and that is what we're relying on is very old engineering and very old technology, if you will. I agree with Mr. Walters. I don't like systems for draining water, stormwater that is surface drainage. I don't really care for what's there at White Oaks either. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to set down a policy where we make a goal to correct what was done when the city was laid out and these systems were put in place. To me, this is like trying to use, to make an analogy, this would be like trying to use a computer from the 1960s. We don't do that. We've upgraded City Hall, we've upgraded our technology, and we continue to do so. And I think that is the solution here. And so what that would mean is, of course, the more expensive project that's proposed, albeit I think we could cut it in half and do, a partial first, maybe, and then do the entire system, as would be the ultimate goal of Mr. Walters, going down Exborn with a pipe. But I really believe that's the solution. And then we don't get into the issue of are we repairing or improving private property, because what we're doing is putting in the proper conveying system for what is the city's water coming off of Lyndhurst and getting it into the right sort of drainage apparatus that needs to be there. And I think that would, I don't know, it wasn't clear to me what that would do regarding any kind of swale and what you guys want to do with your street. But looking at it big picture as a council member looking at the whole city and so forth, I think that's should be our goal, to underground these systems into pipes, starting here and then looking at White Oaks, because I don't think the White Oaks situation is any better.
Thanks, Matt. Ron?
Thanks, Cameron. I'm just wondering, Jay, if there's some sort of resolution that doesn't require a huge city expense, doesn't set a precedence, so that we would end up with an avalanche of requests by other residents. Not to use a pun, but it's sort of a slippery slope here that we expose ourselves to. It sounds like there may be something workable in there. I mean, are you inclined to continue to work with the residents and see if there's some alternatives that we can come up with?
The part of my difficulty in that is we could sit down with them again, but again, relying on the city's analysis of this, if they want us to do more further analysis of the specific areas of drainage that might be getting into the swale, then that's going to be, in my opinion, a lot more time and effort required to get to maybe a slightly more incremental solution. Mm-hmm. So in other words, the underlying concern that we have from this particular location is that it is a private street. It is a private maintenance conveyance that they have, this storm swale, that the city has put water into for 50 years at the approval of the city at the time. It is creating somewhat of a nuisance, as it's been identified. We identified a fix for that. We felt like that was fair because it was a cost-sharing arrangement. And at this point in time, if we get direction to go towards an undergrounding of the system, then that's where I think we spend time and energy on it. But I think we've gotten pretty close to, they would like us to pay for it all or a lot more of what the increment is. We feel the 50-50 share is right. So the council's direction, in my opinion at least, if you want us to do more, I think it's got to be towards the underground system. But that's significantly more expensive, and it takes the maintenance, puts it in our hands going forward.
And thereby setting a precedent I don't think we want to set.
There's the ability for us to acquire an easement across these properties through this street to put a storm drain under the ground adjacent to or fairly close to the sewer line that's there is not unprecedented at all. We have that all over the place. Okay. So we have public facilities in private easements. But again, that requires the council to decide. We're going to take responsibility for this drainage conveyance. We're going to provide, or be the ones who will purchase and talk to the residents about that easement, and then we're going to pay to underground the system. So in my mind, it does set a precedent from this private street standpoint, which is the way it's been for 50 years, to a council direction to go to, no, city, we take it back under and we provide the drainage conveyance and maintain it from now on. And that's my sense of the difference.
Yeah. And now we're back to that $330,000 figure.
To me, that's one which we spent, some time on. If the direction is to underground this, I think we could come up potentially with some other ways to do it that may not be as costly, but I don't want to guarantee that right now because we have not looked at that other than connecting it to an existing conveyance underground.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Ron. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a number of comments that I want to make, but I want to try and focus primarily on direction for staff, because this is one of those sort of head-scratcher things that we could talk about forever. The one particular comment I want to make in response to something Matt said, I actually disagree that this is a good test place to adopt that kind of strategy. This is, and not meaning any disrespect to the residents who I know are dealing with a difficult situation, because it is a private street, it is probably the last place in San Carlos that I would look to say, well, let's adopt a new schema for how we're going to handle stormwater. I think one of the things that we need to remember here, and again, all due respect to the folks who live there, I want to try and find a solution to the problem. But right now, we are basically negotiating with ourselves. And my experience as a negotiator in the private sector, we put out there, after some extensive study by our experts, we put out there a proposal, a 50-50 split of $21,000, correct? What we've heard back is, that's not acceptable. And that's okay. But what we haven't heard back is, here's what we want, or here's what we're willing to do. And that might be something in the context of, we're willing to accept the $21,000 arrangement, but we think the split should be 60-40 or 70-30 or 80-20. I don't want to see us negotiate with ourselves, because, no offense, only fools negotiate with themselves, okay? So my direction to staff would be, in that sense, meet with the residents, make it clear that we want to see what's their counterproposal, okay, a specific counterproposal. I don't expect them to go off and hire engineering experts, although you're welcome to do that. I'm not trying to restrict anybody from doing that. But I want to hear what the specific response is. I'm certainly willing to be flexible on how we split $21,000. I don't want to set a precedent that, frankly, is much broader than just the issue here. I could imagine any one of a number of folks, some of whom have already come before us, whether it's sidewalks or sewers or anything, that would be very problematic if we start doing stuff like this. So that's my direction. That would be my direction to staff, is meet with the residents, come up with a particular, see what their particular counter proposal is, and bring it back to us with your recommendation on it.
Thanks, Mark. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Well, I agree with Mark in that I'm always trying to find the middle. in this thing, and I think all of us try and find the middle. The $330,000 is, and I have to disagree with my colleague here. I think it's as Mr. Olbert said. I think it's on a private street. It's a bad precedent. It's not a great place to start if we were going to start doing that. The public-private thing, as I mentioned, is very difficult in my head. I know the folks there would probably like not to pay anything, I would assume, but I don't know, or maybe a percentage. I was going to propose a percentage, but like you said, it is dealing with ourselves. I agree with you. I agree with you. I just hate to keep putting this off. I mean, we've already gone on. Well, I got the letter from John, or it came out. We're talking about 9 months ago, and this thing's been going on for years to begin with, anyway. So I just think that maybe one more meeting, but boy, I sure don't want to spend a lot of staff time looking at any more. I don't know that there are other options. Even if it wasn't 330, I'm sure it'd be hundred in six figures to do the second item. I can't believe that it would be anything close to the $21,000. And if my great idea of being an engineer, trained, oh, whoops, I'm not, to put the top on it doesn't work, then I'm not sure what would. But I guess I might go along with that. What would they like type meeting, and then have a final decision on the next time. I don't know whether my colleagues want to do something else on that.
Thanks, Bob. Ron?
Yeah, just to follow up on what Bob said, when Mark mentioned negotiating against ourselves, one of the thoughts I had when I was reading the staff report and listening to the arguments tonight, or the comments, was I know what we've offered, but and we've heard what they don't want, but we want to know what you do want. And so that would be my feeling, is that, yeah, make a counter proposal. Tell us what you think is fair. And in all negotiations, I've always looked to find out, what's fair. Now, maybe some person's opinion of what's fair is different than somebody else's, but we have to find out exactly. Is there a number? Is there a percentage? And then go from there, and then find out. Because, as everybody said, unfortunately, except Matt, because we disagree, is that we're talking about a big ticket item fix on a private street, and I live in White Oaks, and I would love to have a storm drain down there. And there's no private streets in White Oaks. So, that would be my recommendation.
Okay, thanks, Ron. Greg, did you want to clarify something? Or?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of bring to your attention that this really is not just a engineering solution or a money solution, because we're dealing with the existing development pattern here. There's documents and and permission and access rights and everything else that would have to go with some sort of a resolution. Those are the things we would need to bring back to you as far as any kind of negotiation. And frankly, it strikes me in some ways that some of this discussion might be more suitable for closed session or a confidential memo to you. So I think that would be part of the package of information that you would get in evaluating this issue. Very complicated. And I think somewhat unique, but there may be other similar swales on private property that we're not aware of right now.
Before I go to you, Matt, I'll just weigh in and say that I tend to agree with my colleagues. I think I'd rather go with a lower cost solution that will solve the problem. I don't think we should set the precedent of paying for all of it. What the right number is something that people can disagree on, and I think there should be some discussion. It sounds like the conversations thus far have been friendly and in good faith, and so I'm happy to hear that, and I think we can probably bring it to resolution relatively quickly. So, Matt, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, first off, I don't want to give the impression that, I'm sitting here with one solution that I would like to see done, and being adamant that, my belief is that that's the only way to do it. I don't mind looking at a lower cost solution, some kind of surface drainage. My point was that I just think what we're dealing with here, number one, I don't believe it's precedent setting. As Jay said, it's not uncommon when the city needs to convey something, whether it's sewage or water or whatever. Even, PG&E has lines that go through people's backyards on easements. They do that because it's the most convenient path for whatever it is they're trying to convey. And all we would be doing, Greg's comments notwithstanding, I do see that there would be issues there, even if you're going to underground it, of accessing the property and so forth. But simply taking the water that we're responsible for from Lyndhurst, traversing it through the property, forget about the existence of a swale for a moment. It's taking the water through a different conveyance system, through an underground system. You'd require an easement for that, and so that's what you would get. And then any swale for draining the court there would be up to the homeowners. If they want to continue to have a swale, that's on you. That would no longer be on the city, because the city's taking its water that it's responsible for and running it underground through an easement. I just don't see that as setting any kind of precedent. The only kind of precedent it sets is that we're going to try and eliminate surface stormwater drainage, and we happen to be starting here at this site, but we would certainly be looking at other sites throughout the city. So I don't see the danger of setting any kind of precedent. But again, if I'm in agreement actually that having a meeting, one more meeting with these homeowners and seeing, where they're coming from and what they would like to see. Could they settle on what was mentioned earlier, the 55-45 agreement? I'm fine with that, but I was just trying to look at it from a bigger picture of stormwater drainage throughout the city, and hearing what being in agreement with our Public Works Director that surface drainage is really no way to go when it comes to stormwater. Get it underground in a pipe as soon as you can.
All right. Mark, you had a final comment?
Yes. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something I said in my last comment. I disagree with my colleague Matt about the precedent-setting thing, but the other thing that really kind of I just want people to remember is, remember what Jay told us, which is that there were some negotiations some years ago about putting some way of conveying this city origined water through this private development. But the private developer paid for whatever was going to come out of that. Now, does anybody actually think it's likely that the city engineer said, oh, there's a better solution, it costs more money, but I'm not going to recommend that to you? Okay? The odds are very high that if there was any discussion at all about that, it was more like the city going back to the developer saying, this is what ought to be done, and the developer saying what we all know developers do is, gee, that's a lot of money. That's going to make the economics of my project not work right. Oh, okay, let's see what we can do, because as a city, we've always been pretty flexible about that stuff, which is a good thing, okay? And so at the end of the day, what we ended up with was a lower cost solution that perhaps wasn't as adequate as the more perfect solution, but was done as part of a negotiated compromise to meet the interest of all parties. If that's the case, and I think that's more likely than anything else, then what we're basically talking about now is saying, well, gee, that negotiated compromise didn't quite work right. Who pays for fixing it? Well, both parties benefited early on from the negotiated compromise, and now what we're talking about is how do we balance the costs here? And that's why I'm looking forward to hearing back from you folks about what specifically do you want. And if what you want is we want the city to pay 100%, I'm not sure I would support that, but that can certainly be your position. So I'd look forward to seeing the results of the meeting with staff. Thank you.
Sure. Please come on up and have a final word, and I think then we'll move on to the next items.
The entire swale, as it daylights on Primrose Lane, is approximately about 300 feet long, the entire one. We are asking a section, 1/3 of it, to be repaired. The rest is not in perfect condition. That pipe you saw under my driveway was because the swale there wasn't handling the water correctly. I repaired it myself. And it holds the water, it carries the water. So we're asking for 1/3 of it to be repaired, not 100% of it at the cost of the city. And the lower portion where you saw where it ends into Exborn, that there are sections there from trees that are, we can take care of those. We can move that around a little bit. So we're willing to compromise and take care of a portion of it, but we feel that this is a major component of it. It handled the water when it wasn't listing to a certain direction. It was sufficient. And I think over the years when that was built, it was built by code and built with what they knew then, how they compact soil. Now we do things differently. So that's what I would like you to keep in mind, that we're not asking for the entire system to be rebuilt at probably now $60,000. We're asking for the $21,000 just to build that one section. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. So, Jay, you have direction. Any clarification you need? All right. Well, this is a tricky one. I appreciate everyone coming out. I appreciate you bringing it to our attention. I thought it was a good discussion about a very tricky issue. And I hope you have a good rest of your evening. So we're going to move on to item 9. Now, I understand we have a gentleman here who is representing item 9B, so I think we might take that out of order unless there's an objection from folks on the dais.
No objection.
All right. So let's move on to item 9B, consideration of adopting a resolution authorizing the refund of development review fees to the property owner of 1348 Cedar Street in the amount of $8,753. Mr. Savay.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. This is a request by the current owner of the property at 1348 Cedar Street, and back in March, the applicant proposed a minor subdivision, applied for a minor subdivision, and paid the fees, and has been monitoring the discussion about subdivisions. The City Council subsequently passed an urgency ordinance going back to the old rules. The applicant is requesting a refund of all fees that were paid for this application and has formally withdrawn the application. And I'd be happy to answer any questions of the mayor or council.
Thanks, Al. Any questions for Al? If not, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Through the chair, would the applicant...
Oh, that's right. Would you care to speak this evening, sir?
Okay.
I think so.
All right. No. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Mark.
That's okay. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt Resolution 2016-87, a resolution of the City Council of the City of San Carlos authorizing the refund of development review fees to the property owner of 1348 Cedar Street in the amount of $8,753.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Crystal, please call the roll. Al, you want to address the gentleman's question? Or Rebecca?
2 weeks.
We'd cut you a check between 2 and 4 weeks.
Okay. Any other questions, discussion? If not, Crystal, please call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Basili?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
Mayor Johnson?
Yes. All right. We will now move on to item 9A, consideration of approving artwork for the Utility Box Art Program. Ms. Newby.
Good evening, Mayor Johnson, fellow council members. Tonight I'll be presenting the artwork selections made by the Public Art Task Force Committee. On July 20th, the committee met and reviewed over 40 pieces of artwork. When making the selections, the task force took into consideration the artistic excellence, innovation, and originality of each piece. The task force also considered the following criteria. Does the artist have the experience to complete the project within the established time frame? Does the art meet the goals of the project? Does the art transform the area? Does the art relate to the area where the utility box is located? And does the art show the city's unique characteristics, historic heritage, or a key activity? Tonight, we're recommending 19 designs to be painted on city utility boxes, one in partnership with Redwood City. I'll briefly go through each piece, sharing the artist's name, where they're from, and their statements about the artwork. Number 1, artist Wendy Wood from San Carlos. Artwork is untitled. My vision for one of the utility boxes is to share my whimsy line art style with San Carlos. Most of my art has a positive, free-flowing quality to it, so my hope is that this feeling would be conveyed in my utility box mural.
Excuse me, Amy. Does the council want to hear all these in detail?
Or I can just share the artist's name.
Just let me ask the question, please.
Yeah.
If there is,
I don't need to hear any real detail.
oh, I was going to say, if they're as brief as the one we just did, I don't mind hearing them all. If they're lengthier, then probably I wouldn't mind them truncated a bit.
What do you want?
Sorry. For me, just seeing him in a little bit larger format than what we have here is helpful.
Yeah, I don't think we need, I mean, we understand that people are very interested and they have it, at least for me. I don't, you heard it already, Mr. Collins, didn't you, all this?
I was there.
You were there. So I think maybe just eliminate that part.
Sure. Would you like me to share the artist and where they're from?
Yes, please.
Sure.
Yes. Okay. We didn't need, they might have a paragraph or 5 or 10 or 15 or, I think we just leave that alone.
So number 2, artist Emma Leeper from San Carlos, entitled Welcome to San Carlos. Box 3, Lisa Bradley Haga from San Carlos, Butterflies and Bees.
If we could just step slower so we could take
Sure.
that would be great.
That's okay.
He'll be in charge of something where it's just a lot different, I'll tell you what. Anyway, so we can look at it. Ron has already seen this, we haven't that much in a few sizes, as Matt said.
Box 3, Butterflies and Bees. Artist Lisa Bradley Haga from San Carlos. Box 4, artist Suzanne Gale from Hayward, entitled Neighborhood Friends. Number 5, artist Kristen Azar from San Carlos, titled Watch Them Grow. Number 6, Christy Martinez from San Carlos, titled Heart So Full. Number 7, artist Tom Chapman from San Carlos, titled Tropical Menagerie. Number 8, artist Angel Tejeda from San Carlos, titled Beauty of Nature. Number 9, this is the student box, artist Caleb Castro from San Carlos, titled Four Seasons. Number 10, artist Nora Christman from San Carlos, titled Olone Creation Story. Number 11, artist Tanya Cardenas from Redwood City, titled Peacock in the Garden. Number 12, artist Jerry Jager from San Carlos, titled Jungle Gorilla. Number 13, artists Elizabeth Marinos and Monica Franco de Amaya, both from San Carlos, titled Floral Array. Number 14, artist Stella Palladino from San Carlos, titled Train Out of the Wall. Number 15, artist Mariah Ortiz from San Carlos, titled Purcell. Number 16, artist Philip Keller from San Carlos, titled Chasing Butterflies. Number 17, artist Suzanne Gale from Hayward, titled Fitness. Number 18, artist Sofia Ramos from San Carlos, titled Carl's Garden. The last one I'm going to speak briefly about, this is number 19, artist Suzanne Gale from Hayward. In the selection process, this piece stood out to the task force. We identified a utility box near the Hiller Aviation Museum where this particular piece would best fit. Staff worked in partnership with Redwood City to get approval of this design, being that the utility box is in their jurisdiction. We got the approval of this design from their public art task force. Both cities will be sharing in the cost of the artist stipend for this particular piece. It's titled Tribute to Hiller Aviation Museum. And that's what I have for you. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thanks, Amy. Questions, Mark?
Actually, just a couple of comments. I thought those looked great. Ron and the rest of the crew did a great job. Thank you, Amy, for all the good work. And by the way, congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you.
Look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
I will just say that I had a personal reaction to two of these, the Tropical Menagerie, but that was driven in large part because of all the battles I've had over the years with clownfish in my saltwater aquariums. And then the Beauty of Nature one, which is also because of all the battles I've had over the year with deer in San Carlos. But I know there are many people in San Carlos who like both clownfish and deer, so I'm glad to see we're putting them up there.
Thanks, Mark. Bob?
I wanted to echo Mark's comments, thank the committee for us, thank Mr. Collins. I know he volunteered for this position. Oh, wait, you didn't. Seriously, to pick art, it's really hard. I think. And how many of the 19 were San Carlos? I didn't get 17 of them or 18 of them.
There's one artist outside of Redwood, San Carlos, that we chose 3 of the designs. The 19th being one of hers.
I think it's terrific that we have all San
Redwood
Carlos.
City. Yeah, so it's majority from San Carlos.
Well, majority it sounds like 99% of them, and that's terrific. So anyway, thank you. Appreciate it.
I just had a logistical question. So, and yeah, I'll echo the comments. Nice job, Bron. So these are proposals, and then the artists themselves will go out and paint the box. Is that how it works?
Yeah. If approved tonight, we have an artist meeting scheduled where all the artists whose artwork is selected is required to attend and meet with staff to go over the process. So there's a preparation process of the utility box to prepare it for the artwork. They have a time frame where they need to complete the artwork, and then once completed, we will go ahead and do an anti-graffiti coating that protects that artwork.
And what's the lifespan of these pieces of art? Do we think they're going to survive for decades or years? And would we consider cycling the art on some certain interval? Was any of that discussed?
Yeah, and I believe the estimated time frame is up to 10 years.
Okay. That
each one would last. We do have the one student box where we'll do an annual rotation of student artists.
And then, just out of curiosity, how many total submissions did you receive?
39 artists submitted. Some submitted more than one piece of artwork. So there were over 40 that we reviewed in the meeting.
Great. All right, Mark, you had your light on? Do you have any other questions? Any other questions?
I was going to make a motion if.
Yeah. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item? Go right ahead, Mr. Griselli.
I've got to read the resolution, right? There it is. I move to adopt resolution 2016
There is no resolution for this one.
See, I can't even read with my glass. I move to approve the recommended artwork for the 19 utility boxes. Never mind.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yes, I'd like to thank my colleagues for their brilliant choice in appointing me to this committee, and I look forward to returning the favor.
On that note, Crystal, please call the roll.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Silly?
Yes.
Councilmember Grocott?
Yes.
Councilmember Obert?
Yes.
And Mayor Johnson?
Yes. And that is the end of our agenda, and as we discussed, we'll adjourn this evening in honor of the late Howard Girdlestone, who made innumerable contributions to the city of San Carlos and who will be sorely missed. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.